evening from the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I'm Bill London, but you can just call me Bill. That's short for Billy. By the way, I do the wake-up call 6 a.m. to 9, Monday through Fridays on KPNW, broadcasting live at kpnw.com, streaming worldwide, all over the globe. Wherever you are, you can catch me, even in Patagonia, I think. Do they have internet in Patagonia? All right. We'd like to welcome aboard, by the way, a new sponsor for the Crazy Oregon News, and that would be one Alan Thayer. You have seen him here, of course, on Rick Dancer's show, and he has appeared over the years on mine as well. And Alan, besides being a business attorney, and he helps people do things like, well, you know, maybe they need to put together something as simple as an employee manual, or they're curious about laws surrounding their particular business. Alan can help you out. And he also is starting to focus on estate planning, which can be, if you've gone through it or are thinking about going through it, or you're in the middle of going through it, know that, oh my gosh. Well, Alan's your man. And if you want to find out more, go to the website ThinkILG, as in Innovative Law Group. He created that. How innovative. All right, here's your Crazy Oregon News. So, we have a special session here in Oregon, a very special session that is going to be coming up of the legislature. It's not really special. It's a regular, they call it a short session, which gets underway on February 2nd. And it's starting to become clear what some of the things that our Oregon leadership are going to try and push through. Like, for instance, Senator Floyd Przyzanski, the Democrat from Eugene, wants to go after your kicker tax return this upcoming legislative session. Now, Oregon's Democratic leadership have long despised returning taxpayer dollars to taxpayers. So in Oregon, when state revenues come in higher than was expected and projected at the end of every biennium, well, they send money back to taxpayers because essentially taxpayers were overcharged. But, well, that really irritates some in the legislature because they believe your money should be theirs forever. In the latest go-around to keep your money, State Senator Floyd Przyzanski is introducing a bill that would allow Oregon to keep some of the money that would otherwise go directly back to taxpayers in instances where the kicker is triggered. And it's been triggered a number of times over the years. Now, the proposal would require Oregonians to vote in favor of it because it would be sent to Oregonians in the form of a referral because it amends the state constitution where the state kicker is enshrined. Now, here's the way that it works. Przyzanski's change would say, well, the first $300 million of the future kicker refunds would go back to taxpayers as usual. But any money on top of that $300 million would be, well, shared by the taxpayers, half, and the other half would go to the state. Keep in mind that typically the kicker amount is $1 billion or in excess of that normally all goes back to taxpayers. Now, what the law or the way that this is being spent, according to Przyzanski, well, we would spend it on things like education and fighting wildfires, which is a way of saying this isn't going to a dedicated fund. It's going into the general fund. And the general fund is spent any way that the legislature wants to spend it. And usually, typically, when they're doing these taxes, they'll say, well, yeah, it's going to this or it's going to that, and it goes to the general fund, and they can spend it any way that they want to. So as the kicker has routinely sent some big money back to taxpayers in recent years, Democrats and the state's unions, who both control the state, have shown a great interest in a way of keeping your money. And in particular, the unions are all in support of this particular idea. Now, another proposal from an Oregon lawmaker would allow the state to withhold certain payments it owes the federal government when the federal government hypothetically unlawfully withholds penalties owed to Oregon. Now, we've talked about this here on Crazy Oregon News, that Donald Trump has threatened to pull federal funding from states and municipalities that are sanctuary jurisdictions, unless they comply with federal immigration enforcement efforts. Well, the administration says, and the president, we're going to stop making payments to sanctuary cities and counties in states starting February 1st as part of a broader crackdown on policies that is claimed to protect criminals by limiting cooperation with federal immigration authorities. Now, Oregon's most recently adopted budget showed that the state is going to receive about $44 billion in the biennium. That, by the way, for those of you who went to an Oregon school, is $22 billion a year. And I say that because Oregon, well, we're actually near dead last in mouth outcomes here in Oregon's public schools. So sometimes you have to break it down. Sorry. Representative Willie Choates, a Democrat from Portland, says the bill applies in a situation where a federal court has already determined that the president needs to send funding into Oregon, and the president then refuses to do so. Under the proposal titled Recourse Act, the governor could direct state executive agencies to withhold payments owed to the federal government only if a court has ordered the federal officials to transfer that federal money to Oregon and those funds aren't released. So, the bill defines withheld state funds, in other words, the funds that the state would hold back, as so-called qualified payments, meaning state agencies would send back money to the federal government that they were going to pay under federal law or contract. Now, it explicitly bars Oregon from withholding things like payroll taxes, Social Security, Medicare, federal income tax withholdings, and so on and so forth. Instead, the payments that would be withheld would include Medicaid-related transfers, repayments tied to federal audits, where Oregon screwed up, or disallowed costs, where Oregon screwed up, contractual payments to federal agencies, like law enforcement, or penalties owed by state agencies. In other words, again, where Oregon screwed up. Oregon receives, by the way, way more federal dollars that it sends in payments to the federal government, not only in these kind of so-called qualified payments, but even in taxes in general. As a matter of fact, according to the IRS and usaspending.gov, Oregon received $21 billion more in federal funds than it sent out in total money to the federal government, including your withholding taxes and the like, in 2024, meaning Oregon is essentially a welfare state. The bill is going to be introduced at the start of the legislative session on February 2nd. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek has responded to criticism by not responding to criticism over announcements that the Democrats in the legislature want to move a ballot question on increased taxes for transportation and transportation fees from the November ballot, where it was supposed to go, according to the petition that was certified by the Secretary of State's office. They don't want it running during the general election and on the ballot, rescinding Governor Tina Kotek's taxes and fee increases. No, they want it on the primary ballot in May. Now, the argument here is that, well, if we do this, that means that it'll bring the Oregon Department of Transportation funding issue to a swifter resolution. How? The legislature won't be in session after the May primary ballot, and it won't be again until next year. So how can you claim it'll bring it to a swifter resolution? Just by not having people think about it. The critics say that it needs to be kept on the November ballot. That's what it was certified for. And they say this actually is going to disenfranchise voters because all voter data shows more voters vote in general elections as opposed to primary elections. Now, a critic of this was Oregon Republican Senator Christine Drazan, who's running for governor. She accused Governor Tina Kotek of pushing for the change, saying, quote, Kotek is afraid of being on the same ballot as her gas tax. Now, Kotek, at a press conference last week, was asked directly if that statement was true. So how did Kotek respond? Well, she didn't give a yes or no answer. She deflected instead to the legislature, saying, well, this is their deal. She says, right now, my major concern is the fact that we have a $300 million budget hole in the Department of Transportation. What passed last year is not happening. So my job is to figure it out in a bipartisan fashion, which she's never done, to fill the budget hole. So I'm not answering. Now, Kotek, of course, previously tried to repeal the original spending bill that, of course, petitioners went out and put on the ballot. She tried to rescind the whole bill to make it go away and found out that, well, a decades-old legal opinion completely said, yeah, legally, you can't do that. Kotek was also asked how she feels the transportation bill's failure reflects on her leadership and whether she thinks it'll impact her reelection. And she said, quote, I think I would say to Oregonians, if you expect your elected leaders to always get it right, you're going to be disappointed. But what you need from your elected leaders is persistence and a can-do attitude. Okay, so let's say that you've got a decent football team and you've got a quarterback that can't throw a screen pass or can't hand off or fumbles occasionally and has a bit larger propensity of being sacked. But doggone it, he's got a can-do attitude, even if he can't get anything across the goal line and can't score. All right, so let's talk about ODOT because we've referred to it in the last story. Even more fun with ODOT. So ODOT is a part of the Interstate Bridge Replacement project, all right, and a part of the pre-planning and all the stuff that goes along with it. And the Interstate Bridge Replacement team and its leaders were grilled after cost estimates were revealed at the end of last month that were hidden from decision makers and the public. Now, the Oregon Transportation Commission is ODOT's so-called governing body, and they had questioned the project's transparency and a multi-billion-dollar increase that may more than just double the price. Now, public records that were revealed by both economist Joe Courtwright and the Oregon Journalism Project showed that not only were there new numbers, but the project's cost from their last 2022 estimate was $5 to $7.5 billion. That's been known now for 4 years. But what they hid was that their new estimates go potentially as high as $17 billion now. Now, those numbers, as it turned out, had been known well behind the scenes since at least August of last year. And while the IBR team has been asked for new projected numbers multiple times since August and were asked in mid-December if they had new numbers, the Oregon Transportation Commission always said, no, we don't have any new estimates. We're still working on that. Commissioner Lee Byer said at the meeting, if these numbers, the up to 17 billion, are correct, there's no way you're going to get the money to do this at this point. Now, let's go back to October of 2025. Commissioners asked at that time and said it was ridiculous that there were no new numbers, even though there were, and they were told there weren't. So, without really knowing, on a 3-1 vote, they put $2 billion towards the project in 2025, in October. At that time, when asked, IBR said they did not have any projected update. And they said the same thing in the middle of December, literally misleading the Oregon Transportation Commission. Now, at this latest meeting last week, the OTC was asked for updated numbers. They want to see the numbers. However, the interim program administrator, Carly Francis, said, the project team is working to release an updated estimate by March, but we can't make any firm commitments on that. Then there's this about ODOT. So it was discovered last week that the Oregon Department of Transportation for years has mischarged drivers for titles and registration fees according to their own internal audit. The report found that the way the Transportation Department assigns a vehicle's mile per gallon rating and issues with the so-called ORGO program, more on that in a second, means that hundreds of thousands of Oregonians have been incorrectly charged without correct refunds. In the auditor's report, and I'm going to quote it, they said, it is likely that the number and size of payment errors will further increase if more vehicle owners enroll in ORGO under the current structure. They said not taking more urgent action will undermine ODOT's ability to demonstrate fiscal integrity and fairness for Oregon vehicle owners enrolled in ORGO. Now, ORGO is a program that is a voluntary road usage charge system where drivers pay 2 cents a mile for every mile they travel in exchange for a fuel tax credit and lower registration fees for some vehicles. The audit actually paints a really grim picture of the agency's parenthetical improvements and the potential future of a mandatory road usage charge that was included in parts of the 2025 transportation package that will go into effect, namely a per mile charge for folks that use EVs. So this report, which was released at the end of December and finally made public last week, found that action was taken to correct only one of the auditor's recommendations and none of the 9 issues that were identified in an internal audit in 2022. And they found that none of those had been solved. And the report wasn't the first to show the department had failed to make necessary corrections after an audit. Now, an audit earlier than 2022 found, among other things, the state had remained out of compliance with federal requirements for 4 years and hadn't fully addressed audit findings from 8 years prior to that. The 2025 audit sample of just DMV and registration fees and title fee transactions, and this, by the way, is a sample of them. It's not an entire audit where they went through every single one, but in the sample, they found $1.5 million in payment errors. Of those, nearly $1.2 million were underpayments from drivers. Auditors said, quote, we found thousands of payment errors that met the DMV's criteria for correction, yet no corrections were made. A review of 139 errors of more than $100 from the first audit found that only one had been refunded, and the refund amount was the incorrect amount at that. The highest overpayment in the 2025 audit was $446. The largest underpayment was $281. Nearly 17,700 transactions done were found where the errors met the DMV's $20 threshold to make a correction. A total of 343,954 registration and title transactions were reviewed in a follow-up audit, and a third of those had errors. And this is why Oregonians don't want to give any more money to ODOT. So, a rising star in Republican Oregon politics is Representative Ed Deal of House District 17. Now, he's only been in office since 2022, but his stature has risen. Deal really gained notoriety when he led the petition drive to put Governor Tina Kotek's ODOT funding bill to the vote of the people, and succeeded. Now, Kotek, of course, as we said, she wanted to increase gas taxes, double the payroll tax, double and triple different fees for titles and registrations and more. And after the governor got her handcrafted bill passed in a special September session of the legislature, when she got wind that a bipartisan group intended to collect signatures and put it on the ballot, well, she delayed signing so that petition gatherers would only have about 40 days to gather 73+ thousand signatures to put it on the ballot. However, the coordinated and organized petition drive headed by Representative Deal was a stunning success, gathering over 250,000 signatures in just a little bit over 3 weeks. Representative Deal has become a hero to not only Republicans, but also independents through their efforts. And now he announced he's running for governor in Oregon. So he already has a grassroots support after the petition drive. And on that point alone, he's proven that he's capable of creating a plan, planning the plan, and acting on the plan, and succeeding at the plan, which is something that's arguably hard for a lot of other Republicans to be able to claim in Oregon. 60-year-old former Oregon Trailblazer Center, or Portland Trailblazer Center, and one-time Republican candidate for governor 16 years ago, Chris Dudley says, I'm going to run for governor again. As a Republican in the primary, I want to be governor. Dudley announced that his intentions were to compete in a field that includes Representative Ed Deal, Senator Christine Drazen, Marion County Commissioner Danielle Bethel, social media influencer David Medina. Dudley said in his announcement he has a plan to improve the state's dismal education rankings, and that he would focus on affordability and public safety. So, our final story. An Oregon group that essentially is a front for the state's powerful labor unions is targeting at least 4 Democratic lawmakers, running political ads to influence their votes on tax policy changes. The ads that started running last week were purchased by Our Oregon, which is essentially a political nonprofit led by Oregon's largest public employee unions, the SEIU, AFSCME, and Oregon's Teachers Union. And so you know where their thoughts are. So the notable thing that they're targeting these Democrats for, where they have a stranglehold on almost every top elected official, who essentially are their puppets here in the state, they're targeting 4 Democrats. In particular, Representatives Emerson Levy, Daniel Nguyen, Hai Pham, and Senator Janine Salmon, because they're considered to be centrists in their party. And the ad itself features a black and white photo of President Donald Trump signing a bill into law. And the text above the image directs the public to tell those specific lawmakers by names, do not rubber stamp Trump's billionaire tax cuts. Okay, what is this about? What they're trying to do, the unions, are take away tax cuts for everyday Oregonians Oregon families and Oregon small businesses. The move is to pressure these moderate Democrats who are very skeptical about this idea to vote in lockstep with the union agenda to join their peers in the session in voting to disconnect Oregon's state tax code from certain federal tax code provisions included in President Trump's big, beautiful bill. Now, Kelsey Padden, interim executive director of the union group, Our Oregon, says, quote, "Our ads aim to encourage them to join their colleagues in doing the right thing for standing up for everyday Oregonians, not rubber stamping Trump's tax breaks for billionaires and wealthy corporations." That is a major talking point. And that myth has long been refuted, even by the state's own state economist, that yes, average everyday Oregonians are going to save money on these. Like, for instance, taxes on tips for waitresses. Oh, pardon me, I forgot. Waitresses are part of the billionaire class and other people who get, for instance, tips, and also on people's overtime, saving them taxes on their overtime pay, which billionaires are noted for working overtime at, call centers and mills and the like. Anyway, so the Democrats, as of yet, haven't laid out their specific plan to disconnect Oregon's tax code from the federal system. And while the provisions in Trump's tax bill would save Oregonians and Oregon families and waitresses and other people that work for tips and small businesses money, the state, feels that we're going to bring in less tax revenue because that money should be ours, not yours. So that plan will be rolled out. And of course, you might be saying, well, okay, are they coordinating with Republicans on this? Oh, no. But again, Governor Tina Kotek, who's in front of this idea or in favor of this particular idea, says that, she wants to work in a bipartisan way to solve Oregon's problems. Okay. You're crazy, Oregon News. Brought to you by our new sponsor, Alan Thayer of Think ILG, or, if you will, Innovative Law Group. You can find him at thinkilg.com. Rick, roll out the reel, buddy.